In this video, I'm going to go through completing the square, and that's the first part of completing the square when the coefficient of x squared is 1. So that number attached to x squared is 1. The first thing to do is to look at the coefficient of x, the number next to x, and this is a -4. You're going to divide that by 2, and you're going to create a squared bracket, and it's going to be x, not x squared, inside, and then whatever the value of this is, you're going to put. So -4 divided by 2 is -2. So that's the first part of completing the square. It is simply focusing on the coefficient of x, and you put it into that square bracket, and this is an x, not an x squared. Then the next thing you do is you focus on this digit. It doesn't actually matter whether the sign next to it is a plus or a minus, but this digit, you are going to subtract it every time. This has to be a minus, and you're going to square it. Make sure that this minus is outside the bracket. It's always a subtract. And then the final thing you do is you look at the constant, the number at the end, and you simply bring it down next to this expression. If it's a -7, it's a -7. If it happened to be a +7, then you would write a +7. Whatever that number is, you are simply going to bring it down. And I'm going to change that to minus again. Your next step is to simplify these numbers. I would get my calculator and I would type it as I see it. The first thing I see is a minus, so I'd put a minus. Then the brackets, 2 squared, then -7. You type in exactly what you see, equals, and it gives you -11. So I've got x minus 2 squared minus 11, and I've completed the square. Now don't be put off by the fact that the question says write x squared minus 4x minus 7 in the form x plus a squared plus b, and you have minuses in both. When you have pluses, this is simply a generic way of saying complete the square. If you had minuses, that's different. So if you were given a question that said x minus a squared minus b, this is telling you the answer is going to have a negative signs. But when you're given plus signs, they're just generic. A part B would say, hence find the coordinate of the turning point of the graph y equals x squared minus 4x minus 7. Well, this is the same graph. We've just completed the square. When you complete the square, it tells you what the coordinate of the turning point is. Every coordinate has an x and a y. The x coordinate of the turning point is 2. You look at the number inside the bracket, and the number inside the bracket is a -2, and you always swap the sign. If it's a -2, it becomes a +2. And then the y coordinate is that number there, exactly as it is. You don't swap the sign. This says -11, so my y coordinate of the turning point is -11. The other thing you can do with an expression like this is you can solve it to find the values of x. So I've already completed the square, x minus 2 squared minus 11. That equals to 0, and I can solve. The first thing you do is you add the 11 on both sides. So you have x minus 2 squared equals a +11. The next thing you want to do is you need to square root both sides. When you square root this side here, you're going to get rid of the square at the top. And when you square root the 11, you need to put a plus and minus side just before the square root 11. Because you know that every time you square root, you're going to get two answers, either a positive or a negative. I'm going to show you with a small number. If you square root a 4, the answer could be 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. What number multiplied by itself gives me 4? 2. But if you square root 4, the answer could also be negative 2, because negative 2 times negative 2 also gives a positive 4. So every time you square root, you are going to get two answers, a positive and a negative, and you show that by putting this plus and minus before the root 11. I can actually take away the brackets here. To finish this, I need to add 2 to both sides. So I put x equals 2 plus or minus the square root. I actually like leaving a space here and putting the number in front. Now it says you give your answers to 3 significant figures. So you get your calculator and you type it one at a time. So 2 plus root 11 equals, then you press your SD button, and to 3 significant figures 5.32, because the 6 rounds up. So x equals 5.32 to 3 significant figures. And then the next one, 2 minus root 11 and SD button, and it's minus 1.32. So minus 1.32, and that is to 3 significant figures. The next question says, complete the square for x squared plus 3x plus 8 and explain why the graph of this curve does not cut the x-axis. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to complete the square. So we look at the coefficient of x, we divide it by 2. If it's an odd number, leave it as a fraction. Don't round, don't use decimals until the very end if you're solving. So this is x plus 3 over 2 squared. And then remember, this number has to be subtracted, so it has to be a minus, and it has to be squared. And then I bring that plus 8 down. And you get your calculator and you type it. You type this section, because you need to simplify it exactly as you see it. Minus, brackets, fraction 3 over 2, close brackets, squared, plus 8. And you're going to get a positive 23 over 4. So this is x plus 3 over 2 squared and plus 23 over 4. So I've completed the square. I now need to explain why the graph, which is y equals, doesn't cut the x-axis. So let's have a look. I'm going to do this visually. My first step really is to find the turning point, the coordinate of the turning point. The coordinate of the turning point has an x and a y. The x coordinate is always this number inside the bracket, but I need to swap the sign. So since this is a positive 3 over 2, it's going to be a negative 3 over 2 or negative 1.5. At this point, it's probably good to use decimals so you have a better feel for the number. And then the y coordinate is this number without swapping the signs. So if I use my SD button, this is 5.75. And remember that the number at the end is the y-intercept. It's where the graph cuts the y-axis. In any equation, whether it's a linear equation, a straight line graph, or a quadratic or a cubic, the number at the end of a three-term quadratic is the y-intercept. So that means that the graph is going to cut at y and turn. So that's 8, and maybe that's -1, and that's 5.75. And it's a U shape, it's a positive quadratic. So your first step is to find the turning point. Your second step could be to draw a graph. Alternatively, you can simply explain that the y-coordinate is positive. So the graph turns without cutting the x-axis. So, or you can say that the whole turning point is above the x-axis. Turning point, so that's one way of saying it. That's one way of showing it. You can say turning point is above the x-axis, doesn't cut. And that is completing the square.